Right, so while you were scrolling through your feed debating whether pineapple belongs on pizza, something absolutely horrific happened on the other side of the world that's got British terror police sweating bullets and our government scrambling. Bondi Beach, that iconic Australian stretch of sand where people normally worry about sunburn and shark warnings, just became the site of a terrorist attack so brazen, so calculated, that counter-terrorism chiefs here in the UK are now on what I can only describe as panic mode. 12 people dead, 29 injured, and one very uncomfortable question hanging in the air. Could it happen here next? Welcome back to UK Political Insight, and if this is your first time here, buckle up, because we don't do boring. Today we're diving into why Keir Starmer and British security services are losing sleep over copycat attacks, what this means for Jewish communities across Britain, and why some critics are pointing fingers at the very streets we walk on every day. Let's paint the picture. It's shortly after 6:45 in the evening, local time. Families are gathering in the Bondi Beach area for what should be a beautiful celebration, the first night of Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights. You know, that time of year when people come together for peace, tradition, and joy. Instead, what they got was an act of pure, calculated evil. Two gunmen opened fire on a Jewish event, turning a night of celebration into an absolute nightmare. 12 people lost their lives, including one of the shooters. 29 more were rushed to hospital, and among the injured was a child, because apparently these cowards don't draw the line anywhere. One of the victims has been named as Rabbi Eli Schlanger, a 41-year-old father of 5 who was actually born right here in London. He grew up in Temple Fortune, North London, had family ties to Kinlow Synagogue in Finchley, and had been serving as assistant rabbi at Chabad of Bondi, a Jewish cultural center. Just 2 months ago, he and his wife Chayala were celebrating the birth of their youngest child, a baby boy. 2 months. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a statistic on a news ticker. This was a man with roots in our communities, with a family, with a future that got ripped away because of hate. Now here's where it gets properly disturbing for those of us sitting here in Britain. One of the suspected shooters has been named as Naveed Akram from Bonnyrigg in Sydney's southwest, according to a law enforcement official speaking anonymously to Australian media. Police raided his home, which tells you they're piecing together how this happened and who might have helped. The other gunman is in custody, probably having a very uncomfortable conversation with Australian authorities right about now. But what matters for us isn't just what happened in Sydney. It's what British counter-terrorism officials think might happen next, right here on our doorstep. So why exactly are British terror police on red alert? Well, let me introduce you to a concept that keeps security experts awake at night, the copycat effect. It's this delightful phenomenon where one act of terrorism inspires other would-be terrorists to try their hand at mass murder. It's like a twisted game of follow the leader, except instead of playground games, we're talking about people planning attacks on innocent communities. Counter-terrorism chiefs and security services are now monitoring for any signs that what happened in Bondi could inspire jihadis here to carry out similar violence. And given that we've got Hanukkah celebrations planned across the UK in the coming days, you can imagine the tension is higher than a caffeinated squirrel on a tightrope. The Metropolitan Police, bless them, have come out and admitted what everyone already knew but nobody wanted to say out loud. It's an awful reality that Jewish communities continue to face a higher level of threat. Not faced, past tense, continue to face, present tense, ongoing, persistent, relentless. That's the world we're living in, folks. In 2025, in one of the most advanced, supposedly tolerant societies on Earth, people are being targeted for their religion, and security services are having to say, yeah, sorry about that. We know you're more at risk. Here's some extra patrols. Speaking of which, the Met has announced they'll be increasing patrols around synagogues and other community venues. Hertfordshire Constabulary jumped in too, saying they'd have a visible presence at key events in the county. It's the kind of reassurance that's meant to make people feel safe, but actually just reminds everyone that the threat is real enough to warrant armed officers standing outside your place of worship. Imagine going to celebrate a festival of lights and having to walk past security because some people out there think your existence is a problem worth solving with violence. Let's talk about what the politicians are saying, because you know they've all got to weigh in with their carefully crafted statements. Anthony Albanese, Australia's Prime Minister, called it an act of evil, anti-Semitism, terrorism during a press conference in Canberra. No mincing words there. New South Wales Premier MINS was equally blunt, saying the attack was designed to target Sydney's Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah, which should have been a night of peace and joy celebrated in that community with families and supporters, has been shattered by this horrifying evil attack. When Australian politicians are more direct than British ones, you know something's up. And what about our own Sir Keir Starmer? Well, he joined many around the world in paying tribute to the victims and expressing horror at the incident. So did members of the royal family, because nothing says we stand with you quite like a carefully worded statement from Buckingham Palace. Look, I'm not saying their condolences aren't genuine, but what Jewish communities want isn't just sympathy tweets. They want actual safety. They want to be able to celebrate their holidays without wondering if they're going to become a target. Now here's where things get properly spicy and controversial, so grab your popcorn. Critics have been pointing out something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. They're warning that atrocities may follow in the UK because, and I quote, hate marchers are allowed on our streets weekly with slogans that incite violence. Others have gone even further, saying open incitement has been tolerated by authorities since the October 7th terror attack in Israel. Now, before anyone starts typing angry comments, let's unpack what they're actually saying here. Since October 7th, when Hamas carried out that devastating terror attack in Israel, we've seen weekly protests on British streets, some peaceful, some less so. And the criticism being leveled here is that certain slogans, certain chants, certain banners at these protests cross the line from legitimate political expression into something darker, something that actually incites violence against Jewish people. The argument goes that when you tolerate that week after week, when you let people march through London calling for violence, even if it's cloaked in political language, you create an environment where actual terrorism becomes more likely. Now, this is obviously contentious. Defenders of these protests will say they're exercising their democratic right to criticize Israeli government policy, and that's absolutely a legitimate thing to do in a free society. But the counter-argument is that there's a difference between criticizing a government and chanting slogans that Jewish people perceive, rightly or wrongly, as threatening their safety. And when Jewish people are telling you they feel less safe because of what's being said on these marches, maybe, just maybe, we should listen. The Metropolitan Police have got themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place here. On one hand, they've got to protect freedom of speech and the right to protest. On the other, they've got a duty to protect communities from hate speech and incitement to violence. And somewhere in the middle, they're trying to figure out exactly where that line is, while being accused by both sides of either being too soft or too authoritarian. Fun times to be a copper, I'm sure. Here's what really gets me about all this. We're talking about Hanukkah, a festival that celebrates religious freedom, the right of a people to practice their faith without persecution. And in 2025, Jewish people are having to celebrate it under armed guard because there are people out there who think their very existence is an affront that needs to be violently opposed. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a menorah. The question that's going to dominate discussions in Westminster and at Scotland Yard over the coming weeks is this: are we doing enough to prevent copycat attacks? British terror officials are clearly worried, otherwise they wouldn't be on red alert. But worry doesn't stop bullets. Increased patrols help, but they're reactive, not proactive. What about the radicalization pipelines that turn people into terrorists in the first place? What about the online spaces where this hatred festers and grows? What about the very real concern that we've normalized certain types of rhetoric that, while not explicitly calling for violence, create an atmosphere where violence becomes more thinkable? These are uncomfortable questions that don't have easy answers. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a magic solution. If I did, I'd be advising governments, not making YouTube videos. But what I do know is that we can't just express horror every time something like Bondi happens and then go back to business as usual. We can't just increase patrols for a few weeks until the news cycle moves on and then pretend the threat has disappeared. What happened in Bondi wasn't just an Australian problem. It was an attack on Jewish people for being Jewish, full stop. And that threat doesn't respect borders or oceans. If someone in Sydney can plan and execute an attack like this, what's stopping someone in Manchester or Birmingham or London from doing the same? The answer, according to British terror police, is not enough. That's why they're on high alert. That's why patrols are being increased. That's why counter-terrorism officials are monitoring extremist channels for any sign that someone's getting inspired by what happened in Bondi. And let's be brutally honest about something else. This isn't the first attack on Jewish people, and unless something fundamental changes, it won't be the last. From the Holocaust to Pittsburgh to Bondi, anti-Semitism has this horrifying ability to resurface again and again, adapting to new contexts, finding new justifications, but always ending in the same place: innocent people dead because of who they are. So what do we do? Well, for starters, we need to have an honest conversation about what kind of speech and protest we're willing to tolerate in a free society. Not a knee-jerk reaction that shuts down all criticism of any government, but a serious discussion about where the line is between legitimate political expression and rhetoric that endangers communities. We need to fund counter-terrorism operations properly,